I won't give my name or the city. Let's just say it's an old, working class neighborhood in a city that's seen better days. The kind with old brick buildings crammed together, streets barely wide enough for one car to squeeze through. I'd lived in this particular building pretty much my whole life, or at least as long as I can remember. It was an old walk up, definitely older than me, older than my dad. Cracked plaster, stairs worn unevenly, lights that flickered on their own schedule, and water pressure. It was more of a suggestion than a guarantee. Standard stuff for the area. The building had its quirks, things we'd all gotten used to. You'd hear odd thumps in the night. The hallway light going on our floor would sometimes flare bright, then dim for no reason. The cat belonging to a woman on the second floor would occasionally hiss at one specific spot on the third floor landing and refuse to pass. You know, the kind of stuff people chalk up to the house settling or old wiring or whatever explanation lets you sleep at night. Life's got enough real scares, right? But all those little oddities were one thing. Apartment 4B. Directly across the narrow hall from ours was something else entirely. That apartment, it was sealed. Sealed shut since before my family moved in. We're talking over 20 years, locked with a heavy-duty, rust-caked padlock on a thick hasp, bolted into the door and frame. The wooden door itself was weathered, paint peeling, showing the scars of time and damp, but it was firmly closed, and nobody ever went near it. When we first moved in, my dad, God rest his soul, asked the old man who owned the building then about 4B. Why was it locked up tight and not rented out like all the others? The landlord at the time was elderly, even then, but still sharp. His face clouded over, and his voice, usually gentle, became stern. That apartment is my business, son, and I don't keep it locked to rent it out. You mind yours. That was enough for no one in the building to ever bring it up with him again. The old landlord himself was a bit of a recluse, lived in the ground floor unit, rarely spoke, barely seen. When he got too frail, his son started coming by to look after him, and eventually the building. But even the son clammed up if you asked about 4B. The apartment was a source of silent, creeping dread for all of us on the fourth floor, especially us, right opposite. Why? The sounds. The sounds that came from it. Not loud, startling noises. No, these were quiet, faint, but persistent and deeply unsettling. Sometimes you'd hear a soft scratching like a trapped animal from the other side of the door. Other times a low, broken murmuring, like someone whispering just below the threshold of understanding. And then there was the sound that unnerved me the most, a faint electrical hum or a deep resonant thrumming like a massive distant engine. A sound that had no business being in a sealed apartment we were pretty sure had its utilities disconnected decades ago. These sounds weren't constant. They had a strange rhythm, usually late at night, or in those dead, quiet hours just before dawn when the city finally holds its breath. At first, we told ourselves it was just sound carrying from other apartments through the old walls, but over time, focusing, we became certain the source was 4B. Beyond the sounds, other things were linked to that apartment. The patch of hallway floor directly in front of its door, for instance, was always colder than the rest of the landing. Even in the height of summer, when the building felt like an oven, if you stood there, you'd feel a distinct, unsettling chill like a pocket of winter air. The stray cats that sometimes snuck into the building to sleep on the stairs, they'd never go near that spot. They'd approach, then stop, arch their backs, and either turn around or skirt wide around it, hurrying past as if spooked. My mom would always mutter a prayer and sprinkle salt in front of our own door, sometimes reciting scripture a little louder when the sounds from 4B were more noticeable. My dad tried to reassure us, saying it's just your imagination, or probably rats or old pipes, even though he knew, and we knew, that was nonsense. No rats could make those specific sounds, and a sealed apartment wouldn't have active pipes behaving like that. As I got older, into my teens and then my 20s, 4B became more of an obsession. The curiosity was eating me alive. What was in there? Why was the original landlord, and then his son, so adamant about keeping it sealed? And those damn sounds? I started paying closer attention, trying to decipher them. Was the whispering in any recognizable language? Was the scratching rhythmic? Did the hum fluctuate? Sometimes, late at night, after my parents were asleep, I'd crack open our door and stand in the darkened hallway, just listening. Once I pressed my ear against the cold, ancient wood of 4B's door. The chill I mentioned seeped right through my clothes. And I heard... I heard something like a clock ticking, but incredibly slow and erratic. Tick. Then a long silence. Then 2 quick ticks. Then an even longer silence, followed by a sound like a deep, shuddering intake of breath. Then the ticking resumed. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled back to our apartment, slamming our door, convinced an eye had been watching me through some unseen crack in 4B. I started asking the older tenants, the ones who'd been there even longer than us. One elderly woman on the 2nd floor, a tiny lady who'd lived in the building her whole life, lowered her voice and glanced around conspiratorially. "Aye, boy," she said, her accent thick. "That apartment, it was closed up even before the old man bought this place. They say people live there, then vanished, just gone. They say, God forgive me, they say it was touched by something not good. And when he bought it, he left it as it was. Said no one should ever open it so the badness inside doesn't spread." Her words chilled me more than any draft from under that door. That old? And what did she mean, badness that spreads? Our next-door neighbor on her floor, a kind but jumpy woman, told me she sometimes smelled a strange odor seeping from under 4B's door. Not just must or damp, but something else, like ancient dust mixed with the scent of burnt wood or a strange, cloying incense. An odor that made her feel sick. She said her youngest son was playing in the hall once and just froze in front of 4B, staring. When she asked what he was looking at, he said he saw a faint light coming from under the door. She, of course, freaked out, dragged him inside, and forbade him from playing near 4B ever again. All of this just fueled my morbid curiosity and my growing dread. I became fixated. I'd wait for the sounds, trying to understand them. I'd watch the door as if expecting it to spontaneously reveal its secrets. I started dreaming about it. Horrible, oppressive dreams. I once dreamt I was standing before 4B, and the door creaked open on its own, revealing pitch blackness within. But I could feel something approaching from that darkness, something vast and shapeless. I woke up, ice cold, drenched in sweat. The old landlord eventually passed. His son inherited the building. The son was a bit more approachable than his father, more willing to engage. One day, I gathered my courage, along with two other guys from the building who were just as uneasy as I was. We decided to talk to him, to finally get some answers. We went down to his father's old apartment, now his office. He opened the door, looking surprised. We sat in the small, cluttered living room that still smelled faintly of old books and pipe tobacco. We carefully broached the subject of 4B, the sounds, our concerns. At first, he tried to brush it off, just like his father. Old building, overactive imaginations. But when we persisted, detailing the specific sounds, the cold, the smell, his face changed. The unease was clear. He lowered his voice, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. Look, guys, my father made me swear never to talk about 4B, never to go near it. He inherited the building with that apartment already sealed. The previous owner warned him, told him never to open it, never to rent it, said it wasn't like other apartments, that it was connected to something else, something very old and very wrong. My father was terrified of it. He said keeping it locked was what protected all of us. I leaned forward. Connected to what? What do you mean connected to something else? He shook his head. I don't know specifics. All I know is he feared it profoundly. He said the sounds, they were from things not of this world, and he said there were certain nights of the year when the sounds got worse. The cold in front of the door became biting, and on those nights, absolutely no one should go near it. His words were like gasoline on a fire. My curiosity piqued, but a new, deeper layer of fear was settling in. What was this something else? And what about these certain nights? Months passed. Things stayed the same. Faint sounds, the cold spots, a low hum of anxiety among the tenants. Until the event that changed everything. The landlord's son, despite his father's warnings, was struggling. The building was old, repairs were constant, and he wasn't a wealthy man. He started talking about 4B. Maybe, just maybe, he could open it, clean it out, rent it. The money would be a lifesaver. We heard whispers of this and grew genuinely alarmed. We tried to reason with him, reminding him of his father's words, the warnings, but desperation, or maybe just the lure of potential income, was a powerful motivator. He said he'd get someone to check it out properly, maybe even get a priest or someone to bless it before he did anything drastic. He had to find a solution for this dead space. And so, a few days later, he did. He brought a handyman, a burly guy with a crowbar and a power drill. It was a Friday afternoon. Most people were home from work or out. I was at my window, watching the hallway through a crack in the curtains, my stomach in knots. The handyman seemed unfazed, probably thought it was just an old stuck door. The landlord looked nervous. They started on the padlock with the drill. It was rusted solid, clinging to the door frame with grim determination. The shriek of the drill bit into metal, echoed throughout the stairwell, loud and jarring. After several minutes of grinding and a final loud crack, the padlock broke and clattered to the floor. The door was now held only by whatever internal locks it might have had, or just by age and inertia. The landlord looked at the handyman, who just shrugged. The landlord took a breath and pushed the door. It swung inward slowly with a groan of ancient, protesting wood. It opened just a sliver, maybe 6 inches, and from that opening, at first nothing, just darkness. But then, suddenly, all ambient sounds ceased. The distant city hum, the murmur of the traffic, the kids playing in the street below, even the hum of the refrigerator in my own apartment, everything went silent. A profound, unnatural silence, like the world had been put on mute. And it wasn't just the silence, the air itself changed. It became heavy. An abiding, unnatural cold billowed out from that narrow gap. Not the localized chill we were used to, but a penetrating, deathly cold that seemed to suck the warmth from your bones. The light in the hallway, the weak afternoon sun filtering through the stairwell window, began to dim, as if a storm cloud had instantly blotted out the sky. This all happened in seconds. The landlord and the handyman froze, staring at that dark sliver. I stood paralyzed behind my curtains, feeling the same crushing silence, the same invasive cold, watching the light fade. And from within that 6-inch gap, something began to emerge. Not smoke, not fog. It was like fine black ash, impossibly soft, drifting out in slow, deliberate eddies, as if dancing in an air that had no current. A cold ash, matte black, utterly devoid of any sheen. It began to coat the floor in front of 4B. Then, a sound. The only sound to break that suffocating silence. Not loud, but impossibly deep and sorrowful. A sound like a long, drawn-out, cosmic sigh, or the final exhalation of a dying universe. A sound filled with all the despair, all the finality, all the loss in existence. A sound that felt like it was pulling the soul from my body. The handyman let out a choked scream and stumbled back, dropping his crowbar with a clang that was horribly loud in the returning yet still muffled soundscape. He turned and fled, scrambling down the stairs, his footsteps echoing wildly. The landlord stood rooted to the spot, his face a mask of horror, eyes wide, staring into the gap as the black ash began to settle on his clothes and hair. I couldn't watch anymore. I slammed my door, bolted it, and retreated to the furthest corner of my bedroom, hands clamped over my ears, trying to block out that soul-crushing sigh. I squeezed shut against the image of that encroaching darkness, but the silence, the wrong silence, was still there, a pressure against my eardrums. The cold was seeping under my door. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Minutes, maybe an hour. Gradually, I sensed the oppressive weight lifting. The normal sounds of the building and the city began to filter back in, faint at first, then growing to their usual levels. The terrifying sigh was gone. Gathering every shred of courage, I crept out of my room. I went to my front door and peered through the peephole. The landlord was still in the hallway, alone, leaning against the opposite wall, his face pale as death. He was staring at the door 4B, still ajar by that same 6 inches, the black ash thick on the floor before it. I unlocked my door and stepped out. He was trembling. What was that? What's in there? I whispered. He looked at me with vacant eyes, his voice a ragged whisper. Not in apartments. There's nothing. Just void, cold, and the end. Everything ends in there. He said nothing more. I helped him stumble back to his apartment, downstairs, and set him in a chair. I went back up, drawn by that terrible curse curiosity. The 6-inch gap remained. The cold was still intense, and as I approached, the ambient sounds of the hallway seemed to recede again, as if being absorbed. I stood before the opening and peered inside. At first, only darkness, a blackness deeper and more absolute than any night I'd ever known. But as my eyes struggled to adjust, I realized it wasn't just darkness, it was emptiness, an infinite void. No walls, no ceiling, no floor, just an endless expanse of cold, silent black. And in that blackness, distant, faint pinpricks of light, like stars, but these stars were dying. I watched, horrified, as they slowly, inexorably faded, one by one, like guttering candles. I was witnessing the heat death of a universe, the final extinguishment of all light and energy. I saw or felt the very last speck of light wink out, and then nothing. Absolute black, absolute cold, absolute silence, the cessation of all being, oblivion. That silent, static view was more terrifying than any monster, any tangible threat. This wasn't the horror of something attacking you. It was the horror of ultimate, inevitable annihilation, the terror of eternal, empty, cold nothingness. I felt a sense of insignificance, of cosmic futility, so profound it threatened to shatter my sanity. My existence, humanity, the earth, the sun, the galaxy, all just a fleeting flicker, destined for this. I don't know how long I stared. Seconds, perhaps, but it felt like an eternity of utter despair. Then I couldn't take it. I recoiled, stumbling back, hitting the opposite wall, feeling as if my soul was being siphoned away. I looked at that narrow opening like the maw of some cosmic beast, waiting to swallow what little light and life remained in our world. In that moment, I knew 4B wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just a place of ancient evil. It was a window, a viewport onto the end of all things. Perhaps time flowed differently in there, or perhaps it was a fixed point, forever displaying that final, silent scene. I didn't know, and I didn't want to. All I knew was I had to get away. I ran back into my apartment and grabbed a bag, threw in whatever essentials I could find, and fled. Out of the apartment, out of the building, out of the neighborhood, without a backward glance. I walked until my legs gave out, then caught a bus. Any bus, heading anywhere else. I'm in a motel room now, somewhere anonymous. Hands shaking as I type this. That vision is seared into my brain. The blackness, the cold, the dying stars, the feeling of absolute terminal finality. I'm terrified of the dark now, of silence. I'm afraid to close my eyes because I see it all again. I don't know what the landlord did. Did he manage to close the door? Did he sell the building? Is he even still there? I don't know, and I don't want to. The handyman who ran, the other tenants, I can't think about them. All that matters now is how I can possibly go on living after seeing that. How can I return to any semblance of normal life, knowing what the end truly looks like? knowing that an old wooden door in a crumbling tenement in a forgotten part of the city opens onto absolute oblivion. I'm writing this as a warning, I guess, or maybe just to get it out, to feel like I'm not the only one who knows, to feel slightly less insane. If you live in an old place, if there's a locked room nobody ever talks about, if you hear strange sounds or feel unexplained cold, please, just leave it alone. Walk away. Curiosity won't just kill you. It can kill your soul by showing you the bleak, cold, silent truth waiting for us all. God help us.